How is everyone doing? Happy Thursday, and welcome to another Office Hours. And it's Dr. Mondo back here in Sacramento, back here in the office. It's been a long week or so. I say week or so because sometimes I have trouble remembering what day it is. I think today is Thursday, if I'm not mistaken. But anyway, back in Sacramento here, and we do this every Thursday at 4 o'clock Pacific time. We do it at 7 o'clock on the East Coast, and somehow it's all the same. And I'm really learning how those two worlds blend because I've been in both those time zones this past week. So anyway, it's Office Hours, and this is your opportunity to ask me any questions that you have. This is a chance for me also to go through some questions that I've gotten throughout the week, and to talk about some themes that you guys have brought up in either past lives that we've done. There's some videos that we did this week when we were out on the East Coast. There was a video that talked about sometimes the critical feedback that we see about ourselves, the shadow, so to speak, that we see of ourselves or that others present to us, and how sometimes our resistance to that shadow, our resistance to that feedback can sometimes be a detriment to our growth. So we talked about that. We also talked about embracing the inner child, so to speak. And so there was a video on that. And there's a lot of videos that you guys haven't seen yet that will be coming out. If you're in the Rewriting My Story program, you'll have access to those videos at the beginning of June. And if you guys are thinking about joining the program, you'll have access to those videos as well when you start the program in June as well. So just got back from a big East Coast tour, and the tour was about slaying shame and speaking to people. Some of you have typed in, what's going on? Why are you guys traveling to the East Coast? And we were in Chicago and Kansas City earlier this year. The whole point is this, is that, there's a movement right now that's happening, and that movement is simply that there's a lot of people right now that are in isolation. And this is a movement, this Rewriting My Story movement is a movement to help empower people to rewrite their stories. And in order for them to rewrite their personal stories that they have about themselves and their self-worth and their self-esteem and the types of relationships they deserve, all that sort of thing, in order to do that, we have to first get people out of isolation. And so shame is this natural first step that we have to address if we want to get people to be in an empowered position to rewrite their story. So the Slaying Shame Tour essentially is us going around the country and inviting different communities, like we did in Jersey Shore, like we did in Baltimore and DC and the DMV, is inviting those communities out of hiding and saying, in this particular sense, some of you are in hiding because you feel like you've been a failure. Now, when I say some of you in this particular sense, the particular is when it comes to your weight loss journey. There are so many people that think that they're a failure because they've gained some weight back. So we're speaking, directly to those people. We're also speaking directly to people that feel like they've been written off, to feel like their story's been written, so they feel like they're destined for some sort of outcome. Dr. Mondo, the program here, we believe in a growth model, which means that as you experience pain, as you experience heartache, as you experience your shadow, that you actually grow from reflecting on that pain. You actually grow from seeing that shadow. That even means that at times when you gain back the weight, even though you swore it was the last time, that if you're really prioritizing the internal journey, that even though the body seems to be gaining weight, you could still be learning about yourself. How many people know that? Anyone ever gained weight and said, man, if it was just, the story was just judged on the scale, I am losing, but I'm a failure. But the good news is it's not just judged on the scale. The story is also judged on how am I evolving, how am I growing? Am I stronger emotionally? Am I learning more about myself? Have I figured out what my triggers with food are? Have I figured out which foods I just need to kind of break up with because they trigger binge episodes? That's the sort of growth that we are trying to empower people around the country to understand, that when you prioritize rewriting your story, that it makes everything else fall into place. When you prioritize rewriting your story, your weight loss journey, your health transformation, the relationships that you want, those sort of things fall into place. And so that is exactly what we're trying to encourage you guys. I see people tuning in here, and Tanya and Mary Jane, and thank you guys for tuning in here today. Hey, Peg, good to see you again. Now that we're here, I get to see you virtually back in Sacramento. So again, this is office hours, guys. If you have questions, this is your chance to ask them. And during these office hours, I'll take any questions. So it's questions pertaining maybe to emotional eating. It's questions pertaining to rewriting your story. It's questions pertaining to marriage stuff. It's questions pertaining to just about anything that you guys might have for myself, and I'll go ahead and address that. One of the things I do also want to talk about today, while I have the space to do it, is kind of just again and it's some things that I've been encountering in my own story this week. There are times when again, I think some of the previous videos, even as I mentioned them, they're telling in the sense that there are things that you experience sometimes. There are certain patterns and cycles that you're going to realize you're going through. And the first instinct is to ignore that or avoid looking at that, when in reality, it's a beautiful invitation towards something great. What are the patterns that you continue to find yourself running into over and over again? Those are patterns that you find yourself running in over and over again in your life. They could pertain to your relationship to food. They can pertain to the way that you treat yourself. They can pertain to your relationship with others. They could pertain to the types of relationships that you are attracted to. They can pertain to certain feeling states that you end up finding yourself in. The natural tendency, I think, is when we find these repetitive patterns is to do kind of what they say the definition of insanity is, which is to do the same thing over and over and over. And, I want to be clear that I'm not above any of that stuff. So, even currently, like for me right now, this week, there are things right now that are driving me in a point to say, man, I think I might need to go process some things in therapy. And I make there's no shame about that. For me, to be going back to therapy, I think there's two choices we have when we notice these patterns. One is to avoid it because avoidance is comfortable. And in that avoidance, though, let me be clear. When you avoid those reoccurring patterns you keep seeing popping up in your life over and over, the avoidance is temporary relief because you don't feel the tension of having to sit in it. However, that temporary relief and that feeling of, oh great, I don't have to deal with this, it's going to come up back again because the pattern is just that. It's cyclical. It will come back to another point. So when you get to that next point, chances are that feeling is going to be even more intense, more scary, more overwhelming, cause you to want to choose avoidance more over again. So what could be the shift here? What could be the difference? When you're realizing there's reoccurring patterns, and again, I think all of us are going to go through life, even those that are watching right now in their 70s probably could relate to this. You go through life experiencing reoccurring patterns. What are the reoccurring patterns that are popping up in your life that it's easy to distract yourself from? Maybe it's, again, I'll mention for some people just joining in now. What are the reoccurring patterns that are happening in your life in terms of how you talk to yourself, or in terms of maybe some emotional states, like reoccurring patterns of, gosh, I noticed that every fall or every winter I seem to just go through a lull of depression. What are the reoccurring patterns of relationships that you find yourself in? What are those reoccurring patterns? And I want to implore you to not just notice the fear that comes up with realizing that shadow, but also to take a moment to kind of pull your car over and just park it and sit in that for a bit. And I know that's not comfortable, but what happens when you sit in that, and what happens then when you make an intentional choice to process that, when you make an intentional choice to seek support for that, is that you're going to find that it's a beautiful invitation to grow. The only way we grow is by going through pain. You guys know that I've mentioned quite a bit this podcast that we even dropped a link in last week. I've been mentioning it for a long time. But if you haven't listened to it yet, you got to give it a listen. It's not my podcast. It's Tim Ferriss, who's my favorite podcaster. He's a great author. Tim Ferriss interviews Ray Dalio. Ray Dalio has a book called Principles. In the book and in the podcast, Ray talks about, again, this equation of progress or growth is really the way we get to that end state of growth is by experiencing pain plus reflection. So again, we need the pain. Sometimes realizing these reoccurring patterns that are coming up in your life is painful, but the pain is necessary to growth. In the same sense as you found pain is necessary to growth for your body, you have to tear down muscle fibers, right? But in order to make your muscles repair and grow bigger, you also need some reflection. You need some downtime for that. And the downtime is really, really key. And the downtime is the thing that we typically miss. Why? Well, because we live in a society that moves 1,000,000 miles a minute. We live in a society that doesn't really kind of create spaces for vulnerability. It discourages it. So what ends up happening is that we notice these reoccurring symptoms and cycles of pain, that long-standing behavioral patterns that we're locked into, long-standing, significant places that we end up in that causes distress and pain. But the thing is that it's easy to not make time for the reflection. So what are some long-standing, this is where I'm at today in this week. And so, leading with vulnerability for you guys, it's saying, I'm going to need to pull over, and I am pulling over to reflect on that. And I think through that reflection initially is a bit of fear, but it's also knowing that through the reflection and maybe going back to therapy that I know I'm going to grow from that. And so there is like a sliver in the middle of that overwhelming feeling. There's a sliver of optimism and hope. And having gone through this process before of growth, I know that the reflection isn't always easy to do, but it's necessary. So what are the things that you're realizing right now that you guys are currently noticing that are reoccurring themes in different aspects of your life? Maybe you're at a point in the reoccurring theme that it's not causing distress. So chances are you're probably not going to reflect on it a whole lot. But if you are in a place where you see the same pattern kind of unfolding over and over, what would it look like for you to reflect on that a bit and to look to do what we call pattern interruption, to interrupt that pattern? And some of interrupting that pattern isn't just having insight. Insight is great, but what's better than insight is action. Action informed by insight. What would be some action steps that you could take today that would lead towards some pattern interruption? And I continue to say this line over and over because I believe so much in it. But there's real power in dialogue, and there's real disempowerment in monologue. Monologue is keeping everything within. When you keep things within, that monologue always leads to negative conclusions, negative beliefs, negative worst-case scenarios. When you dialogue about it, even as scary as that may be to say things out loud, what ends up ultimately happening is that you feel better, and you start to get feedback from someone that allows you to know that no, you're not strange for feeling the way you do, and to really have a lot of support around that. So that is what I really implore you guys to do is to really notice what are some long-standing patterns that continue to repeat themselves. Take some time to pull over. Take some time to really make for yourself so that you can find reflection. From that pain, from that reflection comes growth. Pat, how are you doing? Hi from Cleveland. We need to get out to Cleveland. That's one place we haven't been. And so glad to have you tune in and curious how you found us. Please tell us too, guys that are tuning in. Let us know. We do a Tuesday night broadcast, and the Tuesday night broadcast is centered along weight loss transformations, the story behind the weight loss transformation. But then also too, we do these office hours, and we do videos throughout the week and things like that. So interested to hear how Pat, how you found us. Maybe it was from one of those broadcasts we do, but nonetheless, thank you for tuning in. If there's any questions any of you have, got another 5 minutes or so, and I'm here for you guys to take your questions. I would be remiss not to also say that in this theme of today's office hours about noticing the uncomfortable processes or the uncomfortable patterns in your life, and how it's important to lean into that. And it's important in order to change that to lean into that and reflect. There are often, the most common one that I hear about because of the work that I do around the weight loss stuff is the pattern of noticing that, right now I'm in this cycle of eating my feelings or not going to the gym. I'm in a pattern of not taking care of myself. And predictably that happens when, an unexpected life event occurs, like there's extra stress at work or extra stress in my marriage, or when there's a sliver of doubt. So what I really want you guys to do with that is to, if you're in that right now, I know it's scary and painful to notice that cycle, but I do want you to pull over, even if it's during this video, and just notice what's going on. And is there a way that you could find some support in the midst of that? So what is the pattern that you're engaged in? Maybe, and look below that. So there's symptomology to me. Like, often we get lost chasing symptoms. So the symptom may be that I'm in this pattern of just binge eating, or I'm in this pattern of gaining weight and not wanting to notice it. I want to ignore it. Okay, so that's the pattern that you're in right now. But at the same time, what's happening for you emotionally under the surface? A lot of times when we're stuck on the symptom, we just feel a lot of shame. Like, ooh, that's ugly. Why do I do that? The behavioral pattern is shameful by nature because it's not put in context. So when you look at the under the surface stuff, it's like, what's really happening here? So a lot of times when people end up in those patterns of not going to the gym, or patterns of, longstanding patterns of getting in emotional eating and putting on weight. And I know someone on here is saying, well, I didn't make it to the gym tonight. It's, one time doesn't make it a pattern. We're talking more about, consistencies where you just notice that. A lot of times what's below the surface in that pattern is certain emotions that you're feeling and you're just not ever giving yourself a chance to really key into. So there's some emotional checking in that you'll need to do in order to really help understand the pattern. The pattern's fueled by the emotion a lot of times. So, maybe it is because there are some factors in your life that you're feeling really hopeless about, or you're feeling really sad about, or you're feeling really anxious about, or you're feeling really angry about, and you're not ready yet, or you're afraid of tuning into that. However, tuning into that is also going to help you disrupt the pattern. So again, what is the pattern that I'm stuck in doing, and what is under the surface potentially that's driving it? Naturally, I'm going to go to the under the surface place because I'm a therapist. So with that, I'm going to tell you that I'm not special in what I do in that sense. All therapists go under the surface. So if anyone is feeling like that, I always encourage, look in your local area. There are great therapists you could reach out to where you could just start processing that. We do some of that work in the program, without a doubt. The Rewriting My Story program, it gives you a chance to give you the tools that you would use in therapy, but it's not one-on-one therapy. So sometimes you need more of that. And sometimes you need to realize that these opportunities that come up, they're not necessarily going to be, you might not get the next one when you recognize the pattern for another couple months or sometimes another year. And so take the advantage when it presents itself. Notice the patterns that continue to repeat in your life. Don't run from them. Even if you're embarrassed by them, ashamed of them, whatever it may be, notice them. Notice them, pull your car over, and spend some time reflecting in that. Spend some time in dialogue around that. And I guarantee that by doing that, you will create an invitation to interrupt that pattern. Pattern interruption, as Ray Dalio would talk about, he wouldn't call it that, but he would call growth and progress happening from developing principles out of the pain and the reflection. So there's something we can learn about ourselves. There's an opportunity if we just stop and reflect, as opposed to continuing to live the same cycle out over and over and over again. You guys have an amazing Thursday. It's been so good having a chance just to share some of my thoughts with you today. Do not forget, we have a very, very exciting return of Rewriting My Story. We took last week off. We'll be back on Tuesday, and our guest on Tuesday is no other than Josh LaJaunie. And if anyone is familiar with plant-based eating or plant-based nutrition or which I think is the same thing pretty much. I was gonna say plant-based exercise or running, or is a member of the Missing Chins running group or Missing Chins support page here on Facebook, then you are very aware of who Josh LaJaunie is. It's funny because I mentioned before in football, there's the Bill Walsh coaching tree. All these really, really amazing coaches in football at one time served underneath Bill Walsh. They were mentored by him. They served on his staffs. And it's interesting because Josh LaJaunie seems like he has his own plant-based tree. There's so many amazing people that I've gotten a chance to interview or meet that were impacted positively by Josh LaJaunie's journey and his time and his effort that he creates for people. So anyway, I'm just excited to have him on the program, excited to talk to him about his journey. He is going to be this next Tuesday night, so please do not forget to tune in on Tuesday night, and that will be at 9 p.m. Eastern Time, 6 p.m. Pacific. And we will have Josh LaJaunie here, and he will be ready to take any of your questions, including telling his story. I'm sure if I looked around a lot, there's tons about the emotional part of his journey. As you can probably get a sense, a lot of what I think this show is for people that are feeling like they're at square one or they're hopeless. And so I'm going to cater my conversation towards you guys in that sense that, if you're feeling at times hopeless, I want Josh to speak about, you're going to look at him, you're going to think this guy's never been overweight a day in his life because he looks great, he's in great shape. But I want him to tell his story about what it was like from day one. And yeah, so you get a chance to hear more from Josh LaJaunie next week. Again, you guys have a great week, a great holiday weekend, and then we will see you on Tuesday back for another episode of Rewriting My Story. We had a new video that just came out about a trip that I took to a radio station here in Sacramento. If you're in Sacramento, you're very probably familiar with 98 Rock. They have a great afternoon show called That Damn Show, and That Damn Show has invited me on a couple times, and this last time I went, I'm just, I was kind of blown away, I'll be honest, going to a rock radio station and going to an afternoon morning show. Can you tell, I might need a little sleep, that might be part of this, but going to an afternoon radio show, I didn't know what kind of calls I was going to get. I went on Valentine's Day, and then this last time I went on Mother's Day. So I'm thinking I might get like some prank calls or some, but both times I've been, I got some really amazing phone calls, and I think that's a tribute a lot and a testament a lot to the show and its hosts, who are amazing people. They're really funny. They got a great dynamic between all of them. But on top of that, they're able to switch gears, as I like to call it. They're able to get down into a lower gear and have some deep, hard conversations. And they invite that out, and their listeners were really up for the challenge of sitting in that space, and they did. And they called in, and they had great questions. And so I think we have links to the audio if you want to hear the full program. My appearance was an hour long on the show, and you can hear me take phone calls and just talk with the guys on the team. And then there's a short little video that New Visions Media and Daniel Robertson put together, and I want to give him a big shout out because he does amazing videography work, and he just put out an amazing video. So definitely check that out when you get a chance. It's on the Dr. Mondo page. Feel free to share it if it speaks to you. But that video is about community and the importance of us getting out of isolation. It's all interconnected. The slaying shame, the rewriting my story, the community, the isolation stuff, and getting out of it. They're all interrelated. But anyway, that's what's going on. You guys have a great weekend, and I will see you guys